Sarah Voss woke up before the sun every single morning, not because she wanted to, because she had to. The pack house was cold at that hour, and the stone floors sent a chill straight through her thin shoes as she carried buckets of water from the well to the kitchen. She did not complain. She had learned very early in her life that complaining changed nothing. The water still needed carrying, the floors still needed scrubbing, and no one in the Iron Vale pack cared whether she was tired or cold or sad. She was 18 years old, and she had no wolf. In a pack of hundreds, that made her less than nothing. Every wolf-born member of the Iron Vale pack shifted for the first time somewhere between their 15th and 17th year. It was a painful process, bones reshaping, skin tightening, a sound like thunder moving through the body from the inside. But it was also the most important moment of a pack member's life. The shift meant belonging. It meant rank. It meant that the moon goddess had looked at you and said, "You are one of mine." Sarah had waited. At 15, she had waited with quiet hope. At 16, she had waited with growing worry. At 17, she had stopped waiting and simply accepted that something in her was broken. By 18, she no longer thought about it. She just carried the water. Her mother had died the night Sarah was born, and her father had left the pack before her first birthday. Nobody spoke about him. She had grown up in the servants' quarters, raised loosely by the kitchen staff, given chores before she was old enough to fully understand what chores were. She learned to sew before she learned to read. She learned to be invisible before she learned her own last name. The only person who had ever been genuinely kind to her was an old woman named Elder Marin, who sometimes left warm bread outside Sarah's door on cold nights, and once, years ago, had told her, "You have quiet strength, child. The world does not always recognize that kind of strength, but it is real." Sarah had held those words carefully for years, the way you hold something small and fragile that you are afraid to drop. Then the Alpha King arrived at Iron Vale, and those words became very hard to believe. His name was Calum Draveth, and he ruled over 7 packs. He was tall, sharp-eyed, and spoke with the kind of calm that made people more afraid than shouting ever could. He had taken over the Alpha King's position at 22 after his father died, and in 6 years he had expanded the pack's territory, settled 3 border disputes, and built a reputation as a man who did not tolerate waste of any kind. He came to Iron Vale for a quarterly review, a tradition where the Alpha King visited each pack to check on resources, records, and rankings. He sat at the head of the Great Hall table with his beta, a steady man named Reese, beside him, and a stack of pack records in front of him. Sarah was in the back of the hall. She had been asked to serve water during the gathering. She stood near the wall with a clay pitcher, trying to be as invisible as she always was. Calum went through the records with quiet efficiency. Then he reached her name. He looked at it for a moment. Then he looked up, and his eyes moved across the room until they found her, the only one standing near the wall, the only one in a servant's apron, the only one who looked like she was already expecting bad news. He said her name aloud. The entire hall went quiet. Sarah Voss, 18 years old, no wolf detected, no rank assigned, no mate bond recorded. He paused. She has been a member of this pack her entire life, and contributed nothing beyond basic labor. Sarah did not move. "I want it noted," Calum continued, his voice even and completely without feeling, "that this pack cannot afford to maintain members who do not contribute to its strength. A wolf with no wolf is not a wolf. She has until the next full moon cycle to demonstrate her value. If she cannot, she will be removed from the pack record." The room was completely silent. Sarah stood with the water pitcher in her hands. She did not cry. She did not look down. She stared at the middle distance, a spot on the far wall just above Calum's head, and she breathed slowly. She did not look at him. She was afraid that if she did, he would see something in her face that she did not want anyone in that room to see. Later, alone in her small room, she sat on the edge of her bed for a long time. She thought about leaving. She thought about what it would feel like to pack her small canvas bag and simply walk out of the Iron Vale gates at night, before the deadline even arrived. Walk somewhere else. Start again. But she had nowhere to go, and something in her, something small and stubborn and entirely unreasonable, was not ready to leave. So she stayed. The weeks that followed were the hardest of her life. Pack members who had previously ignored her now felt free to say what they had apparently always thought. She was called slow, strange, broken, and worse. People moved away from her in the corridors. The other servants, afraid of being associated with someone under review, stopped sitting near her at meals. Even Elder Marin, who had always found a reason to cross paths with Sarah in the mornings, began looking in the other direction. Sarah felt the loneliness like a physical weight. She carried it alongside the water buckets, alongside the piles of mending, alongside everything else. But she kept working. The Alpha King's ceremonial robes were brought to her one afternoon. 3 panels of gold-threaded fabric that 2 senior seamstresses had already given up on. The threading was fine as hair, and the pattern was complex, requiring a very specific kind of knot that had to be repeated exactly 240 times without a single variation. Both women had said it was impossible to finish in time for the king's next ceremonial appearance. Sarah took the robes to her room and worked through the night. Her fingers bled by the 3rd hour. She wrapped them and kept going. By the time pale light came through her small window, the robes were finished, each knot exact, each thread perfectly tensioned, the gold pattern flowing across the fabric exactly as it should. She folded them carefully, walked to the door of the study, left them there, and went back to the kitchen to start her morning work. She never put her name on them. Around the same time, she found something near the eastern wall of the pack house, a small wolf pup, young and thin, curled near the base of the stone in the early morning cold. It was an Omega pup, barely old enough to be away from its mother, and from the look of it, it had been there for more than a day. She picked it up, carried it to her room, and began feeding it. She gave it pieces of her own food. Her portions were already small. She made them smaller. Over 2 weeks, she watched the pup slowly gain weight, slowly become alert, slowly start to behave like a living creature again. She found someone from the Omega families to take it in. She handed it over quietly and went back to work. One morning, walking the long path beside the eastern water channel, she noticed something that made her stop. A hairline crack in the stone, thin as a finger's width, running along the base of the channel wall. The channel carried water from the main stream to the lower sleeping quarters of the pack house. It looked minor, but Sarah had grown up watching the way water moved through stone, and she knew what small cracks became over time. She could not go directly to the Alpha King. She had no standing to do that. Instead, she wrote a note, having taught herself to read and write from old pack ledgers over the years, and left it with the head steward. She described the crack exactly. She described what would happen if it was left unrepaired. 3 days later, a repair crew was at the channel. Sarah watched from a distance, said nothing, and went back to her duties. Nobody said her name in connection with any of these things. The night of the deadline arrived quietly. There was no formal gathering, no ceremony marking the end of the moon cycle. Calum was in his study. Reese had been told to confirm Sarah's departure in the morning. Life in the pack house continued as if nothing significant was happening. Sarah packed her canvas bag, 2 dresses, her sewing kit, the botanical field guide she had found in a storage room years ago, and read so many times the spine had softened to cloth. She set the bag near the door, and then, for reasons she could not fully explain, she did not leave. Not yet. She walked to the meditation grove instead. It was an old space at the northern edge of the pack grounds, ringed by white bark trees, almost never used anymore. The air there was cool and still. The full moon was directly above the tree line, round and white and very bright. She sat down in the grass beneath the trees and looked up at it for a long time. She was not a praying person. Nobody had ever taught her the pack prayers, and she had always felt, at a distance, that they were not meant for someone like her anyway. But sitting there alone with the moon above her, and her whole life packed into a small bag back in her room, she felt something open up in her chest, something tired and honest, and she said aloud, to the sky, to whatever might be listening, I tried. 2 words. Completely true. Nothing added, nothing softened. Then the pain began. It was not sharp. It did not frighten her. It was a warmth, deep and spreading, that moved from the base of her skull and crossed down the left side of her neck like a line drawn slowly by a careful hand. She pressed her fingers to her skin and felt nothing unusual. No wound, no heat from the outside. But when she pulled her hand away, her palm glowed faintly silver in the dark. She stared at it. The glow faded within seconds. She sat very still. Then she stood, walked back to the pack house, picked up her bag, and prepared to leave in the morning. She was in the corridor just after sunrise when Rhys found her. He had come to confirm her departure, a routine duty, nothing more. He walked around the corner and saw her standing there with her bag over one shoulder, and he stopped completely. His expression was not something she had ever seen on his face before. He was a calm man, known for his steadiness. But he looked, for just a moment, like someone who had seen something they were not prepared for. He said quietly, "Sarah, your neck." She reached up, her fingers found raised skin, not painful, not raw. A marking. She could feel the lines of it under her fingertips, complex and warm. She did not understand it. Within the hour she understood its effect. Elder Marin, who had avoided her for weeks, came around the corner, looked at her neck, and stopped walking. The old woman's eyes filled immediately. She did not speak. She lowered her head. Two senior warriors who passed her in the corridor stepped back and looked away, not in dismissal, in deference. The pack's spiritual keeper, a woman named Dova who wore her gray hair braided and had served the pack through 4 alpha reigns, came to see her personally. Dova looked at the marking for a long time without speaking. Then she said, "The moon goddess does not mark the worthless." Sarah stood very still. "That mark," Dova said carefully, "appears once in a generation. It belongs to the one the goddess has chosen to stand beside the Alpha King, not behind him, beside him." Sarah did not say anything. There was nothing in her that knew how to respond to that sentence. She had spent her entire life being told, in one way or another, that she was less than everyone around her. That mark, that quiet, unexpected, impossible thing on her neck, did not feel like a reward. It felt like the truth finally deciding to be visible. Calum was told by Rhys. He came himself. He stood in the corridor and looked at her. Not at the mark, at her face. And for the first time since she had known of his existence, the Alpha King had no words. She watched him process it, watched the stillness in him become something more complicated, something that was not quite regret, but was close to it. He dismissed everyone else. The corridor emptied. They stood a few feet apart, and the silence between them was enormous. He asked, quietly, "Why didn't you fight back?" She looked at him directly for the first time. "Because I didn't need your permission to know what I was worth." He had no answer for that. What came next was not simple. Calum was not a man who changed overnight, and Sarah was not a woman who forgave quickly. He made a formal acknowledgement before all 7 packs, an act that no Alpha King had made in living memory, and it cost him something. The right things usually do. There were pack members who questioned the mark, who resented her new position, who tested her patience in small and large ways. She handled each one the same way she had handled everything else, calmly, honestly, without cruelty. Her wolf came 3 days after the marking, silver-coated, quiet, and unhurried, exactly like her. It came without drama, without performance. It simply arrived, as if it had always been there, and was finally comfortable showing itself. She never forgot the girl who had packed a canvas bag at midnight, walked to a cold grove alone, and told the moon 2 honest words. Years later, when young wolves with no rank and no standing arrived at the Ironvale gates, lost, uncertain, afraid, it was Sarah who opened the door. Not because of what was on her neck, because of everything that had been on her back before it arrived, and the fact that she had carried it without breaking. The mark had not made her worthy. It had simply made everyone else finally able to see what had always been true.